You're listening to Audiology. Support this channel by becoming a member and be sure to submit your request for topics in the comments below. Benedict Arnold, who later became famous in American history, started his life as a British citizen on January 14, 1741, in Norwich, Connecticut colony. He was one of 6 children born to Benedict Arnold III and Hannah Waterman King, but only he and his sister Hannah made it to adulthood as the rest of their siblings succumbed to yellow fever during their childhood. Benedict was named after his great-grandfather, Benedict Arnold I, who had been an early governor of the colony of Rhode Island, a name that was shared by his father, grandfather, and a brother who passed away as a baby. Benedict's early life was marked by tragedy and change. His family was initially well off, with his father being a successful businessman. This privileged background allowed Benedict to attend a private school, with hopes of eventually going to Yale College. However, the loss of his siblings led to his family's decline, partly due to his father turning to drink. By 14, Benedict couldn't continue with private education due to the lack of funds and his father's inability to train him in the family business because of alcoholism and poor health. Despite these difficulties, Benedict's connections through his mother's side helped him secure an apprenticeship with her cousins, the Lathrops, who ran a successful apothecary and trade business in Norwich. This opportunity marked the beginning of Arnold's life in commerce, a 7-year apprenticeship that laid the groundwork for his future endeavors. The personal loss did not end with his siblings. His mother, to whom he was very close, died in 1759. His father's condition worsened after her death, leading to public mishaps and decline. Arnold found himself taking on the mantle of responsibility for his family, supporting his father and younger sister until his father's death in 1761, marked by public drunkenness, isolation from the community, and eventual death. Back in 1755, attracted by the rhythmic beats of a drum, Arnold felt a strong urge to join the provincial militia, aiming to fight in the French and Indian War. However, his mother wouldn't allow it. By 1757, when Arnold turned 16, he did manage to enlist in the Connecticut militia. Setting off towards Albany, New York, and Lake George, his unit was responding to the siege of Fort William Henry by the French and their Native American allies, a conflict marked by brutal acts following the French victory. However, upon hearing about the tragic end of the siege, Arnold's company decided to head back home, cutting his military service short to just 13 days. There's a story that floats around about Arnold deserting the militia in 1758, but the evidence backing this claim is quite shaky and not entirely reliable. In 1762, Arnold initiated his career by establishing a pharmacy and bookstore in New Haven, Connecticut, thanks to financial assistance from the Lathrops. He dedicated himself to his work, rapidly expanding his business. By 1763, he had repaid the Lathrops, repurchased, and then profitably sold his family's homestead, which his father had lost due to debts. Following that, in 1764, he formed a partnership with Adam Babcock, a fellow merchant from New Haven. Together they bought 3 trading ships with the proceeds from Arnold's astute real estate sale, launching a profitable trading venture with the West Indies. Around this time, Arnold also brought his sister Hannah to New Haven to manage his pharmacy while he was away growing his business. Arnold's business had him traveling frequently across New England to Quebec and to the West Indies, sometimes even captaining his own ships. There's a story about Arnold engaging in a duel in Honduras with a British sea captain who insulted him. Arnold reportedly wounded the captain in their first exchange of gunshots, leading the captain to apologize under the threat of more severe consequences in a second duel. However, whether this event actually occurred is a bit unclear. Arnold's trading ventures encountered obstacles with the introduction of the Sugar Act in 1764 and the Stamp Act in 1765, both of which severely affected colonial trade. Arnold didn't remain silent. He vocally opposed these acts and joined the Sons of Liberty, a group that resisted the British government's restrictions. Despite not engaging in public protests initially, Arnold continued with his business, essentially participating in what was then considered smuggling due to the acts. Financial troubles ensued, plunging him £16,000 into debt and leading to rumors of his bankruptcy to the point where he even sued his critics. On one occasion, in January 1767, Arnold and his crew members got into altercations with a man they suspected was going to inform on them for smuggling, leading to Arnold being convicted of disorderly conduct and fined a minor 50 shillings. The public seemed to sympathize with Arnold, likely influencing the minimal punishment. On the personal front, Arnold married Margaret Mansfield, the daughter of the Sheriff of New Haven, on February 22, 1767. They had 3 sons, Benedict, Richard, and Henry. Sadly, Margaret passed away on June 19, 1775, shortly after Arnold's involvement in the capture of Fort Ticonderoga. Despite her passing, Margaret's father played a crucial role in Arnold's business success and helped protect him from creditors. Meanwhile, Arnold was overseas during the Boston Massacre in March 1770, expressing shock and concern over the event and questioning Americans' response to such aggression in a heartfelt letter. At the onset of the war, Arnold stepped up as a captain for the Connecticut militia, elected in March 1775. By the next month, he and his company were on their way to help with the siege of Boston, right after the Lexington and Concord battles. Arnold pitched a plan to the Massachusetts Committee of Safety, suggesting they could take over Fort Ticonderoga in upstate New York because it wasn't well defended. Impressed, they made him a colonel on May 3, 1775. Without wasting time, Arnold headed to Castleton in what's now known as Vermont, and joined forces with Ethan Allen and his group to successfully take Fort Ticonderoga. Not stopping there, Arnold then led a daring attack on Fort St. Jean, located north of Lake Champlain. However, things got complicated in June, when the Connecticut militia showed up at Ticonderoga. Arnold found himself clashing with their leader over who should control the fort, leading him to give up his Massachusetts commission. While Arnold was leaving Ticonderoga, he received the heart-wrenching news that his wife had passed away earlier that month. The Second Continental Congress decided to invade Quebec after being persuaded by Arnold, although he wasn't given command of the operation. Not giving up, he went to George Washington in Cambridge, Massachusetts, with a new idea: attack Quebec City through Maine's wilderness. For this, he received a colonel's rank in the Continental Army and in September 1775 took 1,100 men with him. The journey was tough. 300 men turned back, and 200 lost their lives. By November, Arnold was outside Quebec City. He joined forces with Richard Montgomery's troops for a December 31st attack on the city, which resulted in Montgomery's death and Arnold severely injuring his leg. Despite the injury, Arnold led a siege on the city until April 1776, when Major General David Wooster took over. Arnold then headed to Montreal as its military leader until a British army pushed him out in May. He skillfully covered the Continental Army's retreat and later orchestrated the building of a fleet on Lake Champlain. Although this fleet was defeated in October 1776 at the Battle of Valcour Island, Arnold's strategy significantly delayed the British forces from moving towards Ticonderoga until 1777. Throughout these episodes, Arnold made both allies and enemies. He had a positive relationship with George Washington, Philip Schuyler, and Horatio Gates. However, he clashed with Moses Hazen, leading to Hazen's court-martial and a narrow escape from arrest for Arnold due to his superior's intervention at Ticonderoga. Arnold's friction with John Brown and James Easton, both politically connected officers, also stirred controversy. Brown notably attacked Arnold's character in a publication, accusing him of prioritizing money over his country. After the British took over Newport, Rhode Island in December of 1776, General Washington put Arnold in charge of defending the area. This was a challenging situation because the local militia didn't have the right equipment to launch an attack against the British forces. Arnold found some time to visit his children in New Haven, and also spent a considerable amount of the winter in Boston. While in Boston, he attempted to win the affection of Betsy de Blois, but he was not successful. In February of 1777, Arnold discovered that Congress had overlooked him for a promotion to Major General. He offered to resign, but Washington would not accept it. Instead, Washington advocated for him, writing to Congress members trying to convince them that their political promotions could cost them valuable officers like Arnold. As Arnold was heading to Philadelphia to sort out his career, he learned that the British were moving towards Danbury, Connecticut, aiming to seize a military supply depot. Arnold, along with David Wooster and General Gold Selleck Silliman of the Connecticut militia, coordinated a defense. In the Battle of Ridgefield, Arnold led a militia group in a brave attempt to halt the British's return to the coast. During this fight, Arnold was injured in his left leg, the same leg that had been previously injured. Arnold continued his journey to Philadelphia to discuss his military rank with Congress. His leadership in Ridgefield, especially after the tragic death of Worcester from his battle wounds, finally earned him a promotion to Major General. However, he didn't regain his previous seniority over those who had been promoted ahead of him. Amid discussions about his rank, Arnold prepared to resign on July 11th, but that very day news came that Fort Ticonderoga had fallen to the British. Washington once again refused Arnold's resignation, this time sending him to help defend the area lost to the British. Arnold made his way to Schuyler's camp at Fort Edward in New York on July 24th. A few weeks later, on August 13th, Schuyler sent Arnold and a force of 900 soldiers to end the siege of Fort Stanwix. Arnold cleverly spread misinformation through an Indian messenger to the camp of British Brigadier General Barry St. Leger, falsely claiming that a much larger and closer force was approaching. This trick caused St. Leger's Indian allies to leave, forcing him to abandon the siege. After this success, Arnold returned to the Hudson River area, where he discovered that General Gates had taken command of the American troops, who had moved to a camp south of Stillwater. Arnold shone brightly in the two battles of Saratoga. Despite being removed from direct command by General Gates after the first battle, due to disagreements that escalated to a loud argument, Arnold didn't stay back. Against orders, he led crucial charges against British fortifications during the second battle and was severely injured in his left leg. Reflecting on his wounds, Arnold remarked that a chest wound would have been preferable to his leg injury. These battles reached a turning point when the British commander Burgoyne surrendered on October 17, 1777, just 10 days after the second battle. Recognizing Arnold's bravery, Congress restored his seniority in command. Yet Arnold felt this was more out of pity for his injuries than acknowledgement of wrongdoing or an apology. Recovering from his injuries meant enduring a crude setting of his leg, which left it 2 inches shorter than the other. By May 1778, Arnold was back with the army in Valley Forge, Pennsylvania, to the cheers of soldiers who had fought alongside him at Saratoga. There he, along with many other soldiers, took part in the first recorded oath of allegiance, a profound moment of commitment to the United States. In June of 1778, after the British left Philadelphia, George Washington decided to appoint Benedict Arnold as the military commander of the city. This move is considered by historian John Shy as one of Washington's biggest blunders. He points out that Arnold was perhaps the least suitable person for the job. Arnold had a history of getting into arguments, lacked political savvy, and most importantly, did not possess the necessary tact, patience, and fairness required for dealing with the citizens who had just endured many months under enemy control. Right from the start, Arnold saw an opportunity to make a profit in Philadelphia, even before the Americans took it back. He got involved in numerous business ventures aimed at making money from the movement of war supplies, all under the protection of his own authority. While it wasn't unusual for American officers to engage in such activities, Arnold's actions stood out. His endeavors were often thwarted by influential local figures like Joseph Reed. Reed gathered enough evidence against Arnold to bring the issues into the public eye. Arnold felt wronged by these accusations, and in May of 1779, he reached out to Washington, expressing his disappointment. He felt it was unfair to face such ingratitude after everything he had sacrificed for his country, mentioning, "Having become a cripple in the service of my country, I little expected to meet ungrateful returns." Arnold was quite the social butterfly in Philadelphia. In the summer of 1778, he met Peggy Shippen, an 18-year-old and the daughter of Judge Edward Shippen IV, who sympathized with the Loyalists. Peggy previously had a suitor in British Major John Andre during the British stay in the city. Arnold and Shippen tied the knot on April 8, 1779. Despite the military's restrictions, Peggy and her friends managed to keep in touch with their British acquaintances, finding ways around the bans through the help of Joseph Stansbury, a local merchant. Historians have many theories about why Arnold chose to betray his country, and while they cannot agree on which reason matters most, here is the gist, according to historian W.D. Wetherill. Arnold is a puzzle in American history, a real head-scratcher. What pushed him to become a traitor? Was it the unfair treatment he felt he received from the Continental Congress and his fellow generals, who he thought were envious of him? Or maybe the pain from his battle injuries on top of his struggle with gout made him snap. Perhaps it was the emotional scars from his childhood, watching his alcoholic father lose their family's wealth. Or did his treason stem from a dramatic shift in his political beliefs, a shift that was sped up by his marriage to Peggy Shippen, who was young, attractive, and aligned with the Tory or British loyalist viewpoint? Wetherell sums it up by suggesting maybe it was as simple as Arnold marrying the wrong person. Arnold's life was full of turmoil. He was seriously hurt twice in battle and lost his Connecticut business, leaving him deeply bitter. He felt overshadowed by younger, more honored generals and was engaged in a lengthy conflict with the authorities in Philadelphia, which eventually led to his being court-martialed. Although he was only found guilty of minor charges related to misusing his power for profit, and General Washington let him off with a mild reprimand, this did little to ease Arnold's feeling of betrayal. Intriguingly, he had already started talking to the British before his court-martial took place. Defending himself later on, Arnold claimed allegiance to his true beliefs while simultaneously asserting, falsely, that Peggy knew nothing of his conspiracy. By the year 1778, it was clear Arnold was dissatisfied and pessimistic about America's prospects. On November 10th of that year, Major General Nathaniel Greene noted Arnold's growing unpopularity due to his close association with Loyalist circles. Arnold himself expressed despondency about the country's state to Greene, citing issues like the declining value of money, army dissatisfaction, and internal conflicts within Congress as harbingers of impending ruin without swift changes. Biographer Nathaniel Philbrick points out Peggy Shippen's considerable influence over Arnold. Coming from a Loyalist family with strong British connections, Peggy was key in passing information to the British. Although Arnold was known to be decisive and independent, Philbrick argues that Peggy, along with Arnold's staff, had a significant sway over him, highlighting her role in the infamous plot. In early May 1779, Benedict Arnold got in touch with Joseph Stansbury, a merchant from Philadelphia. Arnold had a secretive proposal. He wanted to offer his services to Sir Henry Clinton, the British commander. Despite Arnold's specific instruction to keep this plot between themselves, Stansbury didn't stick to the plan. He boldly crossed over to British territory to discuss things with Jonathan Odell in New York. Odell was a committed loyalist involved with William Franklin, Benjamin Franklin's son and the last colonial governor of New Jersey. On May 9th, through Franklin's introduction, Stansbury met Major Andre, the newly appointed British spy chief. That meeting kicked off a covert exchange of letters between Arnold and Andre, sometimes with Arnold's wife Peggy actively participating in passing messages. Major Andre was given full freedom by Clinton to engage Arnold's proposition. He promptly sent out detailed instructions for Arnold and Stansbury on how they could assist the British cause and how they should communicate secretly. The plan was to smuggle letters through a network of women Peggy Arnold knew, ensuring Peggy was the only one in the loop about the true nature of these letters. These messages were to be written in code or invisible ink and couriered by Stansbury. By July 1779, Arnold began feeding the British information about American troop movements, strengths, and the locations of supply depots. In exchange, Arnold started negotiations for compensation, initially requesting to cover his financial losses, and an additional £10,000, citing a precedent set by the Continental Congress's payment to Charles Lee for his military contributions. Clinton, who was keen on seizing control of the Hudson River Valley, showed great interest in Arnold's intel, especially on West Point's defenses and other strategic points along the Hudson River. He even pushed for a personal meeting with Arnold and suggested that Arnold should aim for a more significant military position. However, by October 1779, talks seemed to have stalled. Back in Philadelphia, the mood was turning ugly against known loyalists, putting Arnold and his in-laws, the Shippen family, in a precarious position. Arnold sought help from Congress and local officials to secure protection for himself and his in-laws, but didn't get the support he needed. Arnold's military trial for making money inappropriately kicked off on June 1, 1779, but got delayed to December of that year due to the commotion caused by Clinton's capture of Stony Point, New York. This event had the army scrambling. Arnold wasn't liked much by some of the judges because of past disagreements and actions during the war. However, by January 26, 1780, they found him not guilty of all but 2 minor accusations. Arnold tried to spread the word about being mostly cleared of charges, but Washington, Despite having just congratulated Arnold for the birth of his son, Edward Shippen Arnold, on March 19th, gave him a formal reprimand in early April. Washington expressed disappointment, saying he would have preferred to praise an officer of Arnold's renowned service to the country. Washington felt obliged to state that Arnold's actions, for which he had been convicted, were thoughtless and inappropriate. Following Washington's criticism, Congress decided to look into how Arnold had been spending money during the Quebec invasion. They found that he hadn't fully explained his spending, owing Congress about £1,000, largely because he couldn't show the necessary paperwork, much of which was lost when retreating from Quebec. Upset and frustrated, Arnold gave up his military position in Philadelphia by the end of April. In early April, Philip Schuyler floated the idea to Arnold about potentially taking command at West Point. However, by early June, Schuyler and Washington had not made any progress on this discussion. Seeing an opportunity, Arnold restarted his secret communications with the British. He let them in on Schuyler's proposals and even included Schuyler's evaluation of the situation at West Point. Arnold also mistakenly informed them about a supposed French-American plan to invade Quebec via the Connecticut River, not knowing it was actually just a decoy to distract the British. On June 16th, while on his way to Connecticut for some personal matters, Arnold stopped to inspect West Point. He then sent a very detailed report about it through his covert contacts. Once in Connecticut, he took steps to sell his house and started moving money to London with the help of some middlemen in New York. By the beginning of July, Arnold was back in Philadelphia. There he sent a secret note to Clinton on July 7th, hinting that his takeover of West Point was pretty much a done deal. He even teased that he could provide plans of West Point that would enable the British to capture it without any losses. Meanwhile, Andre and Clinton were riding high from their successful siege of Charleston on June 18th. They got swept up in Arnold's news, especially since Clinton was worried about Washington's forces teaming up with the French fleet in Rhode Island. Clinton was increasingly fixated on capturing West Point. He even had spies tracking Arnold to confirm his movements. Thrilled by the potential intel windfall, Clinton briefed his higher-ups, but for some reason did not reply to Arnold's July 7th message. Arnold, not one to wait around, fired off a series of letters to Clinton, even before he could have expected a reply to his July 7th correspondence. In a letter dated July 11th, he expressed his frustration over the apparent distrust from the British side and warned that he might end negotiations if nothing moved forward. On July 12th, he was more forthright, offering to hand over West Point for £20,000, up from his initial asking price, plus a £1,000 advance to be sent with the response. This time, instead of Stansbury, Samuel Wallace, another Philadelphia businessman who spied for Britain, delivered these letters. On August 3, 1780, Arnold took charge of West Point, and shortly after, on August 15th, he received a secret message from Andre containing Clinton's final proposal, £20,000, without making up for Arnold's financial losses. For several days, neither side was aware that the other had agreed to the terms due to the challenge of exchanging messages. Arnold kept sending letters outlining Washington's troop movements and details about organizing French reinforcements. By August 25th, Peggy had handed Arnold the confirmation that Clinton accepted the deal. Arnold's position at West Point gave him control over the Hudson River in the American territory, stretching from Albany to just outside New York City. While heading to West Point, Arnold reconnected with Joshua Het Smith, a man who had spied for both sides and owned a property near the Hudson, about 15 miles south of West Point. Once settled in West Point, Arnold started to intentionally weaken its defenses. He did not order necessary repairs for the Hudson chain and spread the troops thinly within his command area, keeping only a few at West Point. He complained to Washington about supply shortages, saying, "Everything is wanting," while also trying to deplete West Point's supplies to make it easier for a siege to be successful. His actions raised suspicions among his subordinates, who thought he might be selling supplies for his own profit. On August 30th, Arnold wrote to Clinton through William Herron, a trustworthy member of the Connecticut Assembly, accepting the offer and suggesting a meeting with Andre. Ironically, Herron went to New York, offered to spy for the British, and delivered the letter back in Connecticut, not realizing its importance. He handed it to General Samuel Holden Parsons, who overlooked it, thinking it was just a coded business letter. Later, Arnold sent another coded letter to New York through a prisoner of war's wife. The arranged meeting on September 11th near Dobbs Ferry was disrupted when British gunboats unknowingly fired on Arnold's boat. On September 21st, Arnold and Andre had a crucial meeting at the Joshua Het Smith house. The next morning, 2 American rebels, John Jack Peterson and Moses Sherwood, under Colonel James Livingston's command, shot at His Majesty's ship Vulture from Teller's Point. His Majesty's ship Vulture was the ship set to take Andre back to New York. Their attack only managed to give Captain Andrew Sutherland a splinter in his nose, but it was enough to make the Vulture pull back, which meant Andre had to find a way back to New York by land. Arnold helped him by providing passes and also handed over plans for West Point to Andre. The very next day, Andre was stopped near Tarrytown, New York, by 3 militiamen from Westchester. They uncovered the papers that showed the plan to take West Point, but Andre managed to talk Colonel John Jameson, to whom he was handed over, into sending him back to Arnold at West Point. However, Andre never made it back. Major Benjamin Talmadge, from the Continental Army Spy Network, insisted on having Andre taken back for interrogation, thwarting Andre's return to Arnold. Despite this, Jameson also sent a message to Arnold, alerting him of Andre's capture. On the morning of September 24th, Arnold was preparing to meet Washington for breakfast at the latter's headquarters. It was then he learned through Jameson's message that Washington knew about the papers Andre carried. Arnold quickly made his escape downriver on His Majesty's ship Vulture to New York City, requesting from there that Washington ensure his wife Peggy's safe journey to her family in Philadelphia, a request Washington honored. When Washington found out about Arnold's betrayal, he was deeply shaken, asking, "Arnold has betrayed me. Whom can we trust now?" Though he was the picture of calm, he immediately began to measure the depth of the deception, and even suggested trading Andre for Arnold, which Clinton denied. Andre was later executed on October 2nd. Washington also tried to capture Arnold by sending spies into New York City, a plan that nearly succeeded but ultimately failed, as Arnold moved before it could be enacted. In his defense, Arnold penned, "To the inhabitants of America," arguing his actions were out of patriotism. He further explained in a letter to Washington asking for his wife's safe passage that his love for his country drove his decisions, despite how they might appear to others. After Benedict Arnold switched sides, the British gave him a pretty good deal for the time. They made him a brigadier general and promised him a sizable yearly income, but when his scheme to hand over West Point fell apart, he ended up with just £6,315 up front and a smaller yearly pension of £360. By December 1780, Arnold was leading a brigade of 1,600 British troops into Virginia on orders from General Clinton. His surprise attack on Richmond kicked off a destructive spree through Virginia, targeting supply depots and production mills. This move riled up the local militia, led by Colonel Sampson Matthews, and forced Arnold to pull back to Portsmouth, either to wait for more troops or to get out of Dodge. While all this was happening, Arnold was actively being hunted by the Marquis de Lafayette, who had strict orders from George Washington to hang Arnold without trial if he was caught. The British sent reinforcements in late March under Major General William Phillips, an officer who had previously served at Saratoga. Phillips continued attacking across Virginia, even defeating Baron von Steuben at Petersburg. Unfortunately for him, he fell ill and died in May 1781. Arnold was in charge of the British forces only until May 20, when General Charles Cornwallis showed up with reinforcements from the south and took over command. One British colonel openly wished for a different leader, highlighting Arnold's unpopularity. Ignoring Arnold's strategic advice for a defensible position inland, Cornwallis set the stage for his eventual defeat at Yorktown. In June, Arnold was back in New York pitching ideas to Clinton for economic strikes against the Americans to break their will. Clinton wasn't too keen on Arnold's more ambitious plans, but did green-light a raid on New London, Connecticut. Arnold's force, over 1,700 strong, torched much of the town, causing massive damage estimated at $500,000. They also took Fort Griswold by storm, mercilessly killing American forces even after they had surrendered. This raid happened not far from Arnold's hometown, adding a personal sting to his betrayal. The British suffered heavy losses in the raid, leading Clinton to remark that such costly victories were unsustainable. Before Cornwallis even surrendered in October, Arnold had already asked Clinton if he could travel to England to share his insights on the war with Lord George Germain in person. When he heard about the surrender, Arnold requested again, and this time Clinton agreed. So on December 8, 1781, Arnold and his family set off from New York to England. Once in London, Arnold found himself in agreement with the Tories. He shared advice with Germain and King George III, nudging them to continue the fight against the Americans. However, his presence and suggestions weren't welcomed by everyone. Edmund Burke, speaking in the House of Commons, expressed his hope that the government would think twice before giving Arnold any military role. Burke emphasized that the honor held by British officers, valued more than life itself, shouldn't be tarnished. At this time, the Whigs, who were against the war, had started to gain more influence in Parliament. Soon, Germain had to resign, and Lord North's government fell shortly thereafter. Arnold tried to stay involved in military and governmental roles, even attempting to join Lieutenant General Guy Carleton on his mission to New York as the new commander-in-chief. However, his efforts led nowhere. His subsequent attempts to secure a position within the government or the British East India Company over the following years also fell flat, forcing him to rely on the reduced salary of non-wartime service. Arnold faced significant criticism in the British press, starkly contrasted with the celebrated patriotism of Major André. One critic harshly labeled Arnold as a mean mercenary who switched sides for profit, only to abandon his cause when accused of doing so. Despite George Johnstone acknowledging Arnold's conduct as pure, he reflected the general skepticism, denying Arnold a position by explaining that public opinion was not in Arnold's favor, and thus it would be difficult for anyone to place him in his desired role with the East India Company under such circumstances. In 1785, Arnold, along with his son Richard, settled in St. John, New Brunswick. There they ventured into land speculation and kicked off a trading business with the West Indies. Arnold snapped up large stretches of land around Maugerville and also grabbed some city lots in St. John and Fredericton. When Arnold's first ship, the Lord Sheffield, was ready, the builder claimed Arnold had shortchanged him. Arnold countered, saying he just subtracted the agreed amount because the ship was handed over late. After the ship's maiden voyage, Arnold took a trip back to London in 1786 to fetch his family to St. John. During his stay in London, he resolved a legal battle over a debt Peggy had been managing in his absence, shelling out £900 to clear a £12,000 loan taken out while they were in Philadelphia. The family settled in St. John in 1787, but Arnold quickly became notorious for questionable business practices and a flurry of minor legal battles. The height of such disputes was a slander lawsuit he won against an ex-business ally. Following this, locals showed their displeasure by burning an effigy of him outside his home, an event witnessed by Peggy and their children. This pushed the family to move back to London in December 1791. In July 1792, Arnold was involved in a duel that thankfully resulted in no casualties, with the Earl of Lauderdale, who had besmirched Arnold's honor in the House of Lords. As the French Revolution began, Arnold equipped a privateer for action, while continuing his trade in the West Indies despite the increased dangers. His adventures led to his arrest by the French on Guadeloupe, under suspicion of espionage for the British. Arnold narrowly escaped execution by fleeing to a British blockading fleet after bribing his jailers. His subsequent involvement in organizing militia on British territories earned him acclaim from landowners there. Though he hoped these efforts would bring him greater respect and a new military position, he and his sons were instead awarded a land grant of 15,000 acres in Upper Canada, near what's now Renfrew, Ontario. Starting in January of 1801, Arnold began to face serious health issues. He had been dealing with gout since 1775, and this condition severely affected his leg that hadn't been injured before, to the extent that he couldn't continue his seafaring activities. His other leg was always in pain and he needed a cane to walk. His doctors found out he had dropsy, a condition that involves swelling due to fluid accumulation in the body. Although a trip to the countryside seemed to help him a bit, it was only a temporary fix. Sadly, Arnold passed away on June 14, 1801, after suffering from delirium for 4 days. He was 60 years old. There's a famous story about Arnold's last moments where he supposedly said, "Let me die in this old uniform in which I fought my battles. May God forgive me for ever having put on another." However, the truth of this quote isn't certain. Arnold was laid to rest at St. Mary's Church in Battersea, England. Due to a mistake in the church's records when the church was being renovated a century later, his body was mistakenly moved to a communal unmarked grave. His funeral saw a procession that included 7 mourning coaches and 4 state carriages, yet it was a ceremony devoid of military honors. Despite the challenges, Arnold managed to leave behind a small estate, though it was somewhat diminished by his debts. Peggy, his widow, took it upon herself to settle these financial burdens. Among the items of his will, Arnold left significant amounts to someone named John Sage, who is speculated to be an illegitimate child or possibly a grandson. Benedict Arnold's name quickly became synonymous with traitor when his act of betrayal was exposed. Using biblical references was common when discussing his treachery. A textbook from 1794 dramatically said, "Satan entered into the heart of Benedict." Benjamin Franklin starkly compared him to Judas, stating, "Judas sold only one man, Arnold 3 millions, while Alexander Scammell colorfully described Arnold's actions as black as hell. In Arnold's own birthplace, Norwich, Connecticut, someone ominously labeled him the traitor on his birth record at City Hall, and all the gravestones belonging to his family were destroyed, except for his mother's. Arnold himself was well aware of his tarnished reputation back home. When the French statesman Talleyrand met him in Falmouth, Cornwall in 1794, Arnold told him after a hesitant pause that he was perhaps the only American who couldn't provide letters of introduction to America because all his connections there were severed and he could never return. Talleyrand noted his pity for Arnold, despite any political backlash he might face for it, moved by the clear torment Arnold displayed. Early writers painted Arnold's life with broad strokes of betrayal and moral failings. The first in-depth biography, The Life and Treason of Benedict Arnold by Jared Sparks in 1832, took a particularly harsh view, suggesting Arnold's deceptive nature originated in his childhood. George Canning Hill began his 1865 biography with no subtlety. Benedict the Traitor was born. According to social historian Brian Carso, Arnold's story grew into a nearly mythical cautionary tale, especially as the nation approached the Civil War, with Arnold's betrayal being used to argue against the division of the Union and likening the act of secession to his act of treason. Arnold was depicted in literature as a symbol of treachery, notably in a moralistic 19th-century children's story about a cruel boy who grows up to betray his country, revealed at the end to be Arnold. Yet not all portrayals of Arnold were vilifying. Some theatrical pieces sought to explore his complexity rather than simply condemn him. In Canadian historical narratives, Arnold is seen as a less central figure. His time in New Brunswick was marred by controversy, resentment, and legal entanglements, making him unpopular with both Americans and Loyalists there. Still, historian Barry Wilson notes Arnold's descendants found their place in Canada, becoming prominent settlers and spreading their lineage across the country, particularly noted in the case of John Sage, who took on the Arnold surname. Thanks for watching. Share your thoughts in the comments and subscribe for more content.